evening and welcome to the next edition of the Conservative Action Network, sponsored by CampusTeaParties.com. That's CampusTeaParties.com, http://www.CampusTeaParties.com. I'm your host tonight, Doreen Finkel, and our topics for tonight are going to be the job market and, again, the upcoming fiscal cliff. And we have with us our guest tonight, Dr. Michael Zay, author of The Mentor Connection, Seizing the Future, Winning with People, Foresight, Innovation, and Strategy, and several other books. How are you?
I'm very good. And how are you? Glad to be on again.
Let's go to the current unemployment rate. The government, which sends out it's called the U3, Unemployment 3, sends out the figure of 7.7%. That's the national average. And I say it only because it makes the government look good. Actually, I think New Jersey, the unemployment rate, were the fourth highest. I think we're at 9.7.
We're high.
But the government's unemployment figures do not include those who have been unemployed for more than 12 months or who are underemployed.
Who are underemployed, and they have a different measure for that, which I believe is the U6. And underemployed is basically someone who wants to work full-time but is working part-time, and that's considered underemployed. The problem with the unemployment figures are many, and for instance, if they call you up doing their survey and they ask you if you're working or not, and you say no, and they say, have you looked for a job in whatever their time period is, the last week, the last month, and you say no, you might be out of work, but from their definition, you're not necessarily unemployed, so you don't go into that. You say, well, gee, I'm not working, why am I not included? Because you're not actively looking, which means from their perspective you might be, they have a number of issues related to that. You could be someone who went back to school, someone who retired, someone who, whatever, so they don't include you in that. And that's why you get these numbers that seem to vary so much. To give you an example, the last month was 7.7% unemployment rate. At the same time, well over 300,000 people dropped out of the labor force, but they said that 146 new jobs were created. By the way, those jobs can also be part-time. So if you're working an hour a week, according to the way that they calculate this, you're employed. That doesn't mean that you're doing well. It means that you were employed for an hour. And so you have all these people dropping out of the labor force. They're not counted. So they're no longer counted in the workforce. So they're basically discouraged workers. There are a number of other ways of looking at this that give us a truer look. If you look at the people who are, even according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you look at the people who are unemployed and underemployed, right, part-timers, then you're getting to 14, 15% of that combination, which is close to 1 out of 6 people is either unemployed or underemployed. But there are other people measuring these things. And for instance, the Gallup organization does a rolling poll every 3 days. They have a rolling index of unemployment and of underemployment, and their unemployment rate is at 8.3%. using basically, supposedly, the same measure as the BLS. So the people they're interviewing obviously are reporting a lot more joblessness. And in fact, that's a jump of, I think, 0.9% since the election. Very interesting that suddenly that goes up that dramatically. So those numbers kind of reflect what people are going through. I mean, think about it. When they say 146,000 jobs are created, we have, graduating from college alone, almost 2 million students. So you need many jobs created during the year just to account for them. And of course, those jobs wouldn't necessarily be college-level jobs. And this is why you're seeing these huge unemployment numbers for the class of 2010, class of 2011. You're hearing numbers that like 53% of the people are either unemployed or underemployed college graduates. And this process of underemployment of college graduates has been going on since at least 2009. So you have the class of 09, 10, 11, 12, and now they will be competing against the class of 2013. And we're not creating, we should have been creating hundreds of thousands of jobs every month to compensate for the jobs that we lost during the recession.
Right, right.
And until recently, even according to the BLS's figure, there were just about the same number of people employed as there was in 2000. And in 2000 we had 30 million fewer people. So you can get a feeling of why, when they talk about 23 million people being unemployed, what that actually means and how dire that situation is. And it's reflected in people's own experience. Their children graduate college and don't get the kind of job they thought they would get, or they're waiting tables. They're just not, or they're unemployed.
Right, right. And in my own circle, we have a lot of that going on. And even at those who have been laid off and they're age 50 and above, they can't find unemployment either.
So the question is, who's finding employment? Because certainly the 25 to 54 age group is not being treated well in this, and these are the people who are the prime. That age group is your people moving into their supposed prime earning stages of their careers, and if they're not getting jobs, then you could understand why there are people why the income level has been going down. We've lost, I think, on average around $5,000 per worker. I mean, people getting, in essence, let's call it what it is, people are getting poorer. And when you look at incomes, and that's being reflected, I think that's reflective of the unemployment rates. One group that is increasing their employment is 55 and above. Why is that? It's not because, well, we know that a lot of those people are facing age discrimination, which seems to roll off the tongue in our society so easily. Why is this acceptable? Why is it acceptable for people to be discriminated against based on their age? So if they're let go by their jobs, and if they are working, that means they're most likely working in a job that's not an appreciable promotion into a new career. They're probably already beginning to move downward in terms of their standard of living, their income, etc. So, but you have an increase in that group in terms of employment. And why? Because they were let go probably earlier than before they could have collected a pension. When they do get to 62 or 65 or 66, or whatever the age would be, now it's almost 66, for Social Security, that doesn't cover them. So they have to find alternative incomes. And you see and it's the boomers that are moving into a type of retirement that they just never expected. They did not expect it to be like this.
Right.
If it is retirement at all.
Let's go back to 2008 when the market, the economy tanked. And by the way, yes, that was under the Bush administration. But when the Obama administration took over, many felt that he should have focused on the economy rather than health care. Okay, so now that we have this debacle, Obamacare, and the economy the way it is, what should the administration be doing to help improve the economy from here on in?
First of all, I hear the administration talk a lot about fairness, social justice, equity, and raising taxes. I hear very little about economic growth. Now, you have to say the word, but I hear very little about how that's going to take place. In fact, you could make the point that the more that any administration talks about redistributing income, it indicates to me the less chance there is that they have any real solid plan for expanding the economy. So what should it have done, or what should it do? Ironically, we rejected part of that plan in this in the 2012 election. Romney had it right in terms of reducing taxes and reducing regulation on businesses, because that would expand the businesses themselves. But I think even more than that, you have to look at the energy sector. The energy sector could alone, developments in that could resuscitate the economy for a number of reasons. First of all, energy is one of your major costs for running a business or running a household or running your life. I mean, we see what happens when energy dissipates, when the system malfunctions like it did during the hurricane. You need energy to expand. So if we went into an aggressive energy development program in the country, which means going with the big four: coal, oil, nuclear, natural gas, you would begin to get the country back on the road of first cheap energy for ourselves, and then the expansion and the expansion of the energy export industry. And that would help us tremendously. That would bring in tax revenue. The number of jobs probably would be the 12 million that Romney was talking about. It would, because remember, it's not just people developing energy, it's accountants, it's all of the ancillary service industries that would be impacted, suppliers, and that would be a start. The deregulation would help us, I believe, resuscitate manufacturing in the country, so we could bring back the manufacturing jobs. Remember, once that happens, people start becoming affluent, then what do? They buy new homes. Well, the new home industry, but we will sell around 360,000 new homes this year. That is just about as many, well, it's actually less than we sold in 1963. 1963 was half a century ago, where our housing market, new homes market, is essentially as vibrant as it was when we had 180 million people, not 320 million people. New homes are important because it creates those millions of construction jobs, which have disappeared, and people keep saying they disappeared forever. Why are they disappearing? Because people aren't buying new homes. So affluence begets more affluence. This administration is going the other direction. They're forbidding drilling. They want to, it seems, eviscerate and eventually terminate the coal industry. And they talk about energy development, but that energy development, utilizing fracking, et cetera, to tap into natural gas, was done in spite of the plans from this administration, and that happened mostly on private land, so they could get away with it. I would like to see what plans the energy has and the EPA has for fracking in the future, because they could just very easily consider it an environmentally questionable type of energy development activity. Renewables are not going to help. It's not going to do it. Anyone who looks at graphs and understands the energy industry realizes that renewables, such as solar, cannot power a major industrial country. And so those are some of the ideas, and I don't see any of that on the horizon at this point. All I hear about is accounting tricks, money printing, quantitative easing. This is not a way to get your economy going.
Right. So now, pretend I'm a student in your class, and I'm going to inherit this economy, and I'm looking for a job. What would you say to me? What advice would you give to me?
Well, if I was talking to a student, the first thing I'd do is apologize for the economy and say, I'm sorry that this is the world that we've bequeathed to you.
I feel like saying that to my son, by the way.
Secondly, there are always opportunities. It doesn't mean that any given person will not succeed and succeed dramatically. What you're worried about is 300 million people succeeding. No, if I would suggest, well, a few things I would tell a student. First of all, think globally. When I mean think globally, not in the usual sense, I mean think in terms of the global job market. because...
So think of relocating into another country if you have to.
Yeah, and it's easy enough for me to say. I know, and we don't teach foreign languages to the point that people could become proficient. We don't do it in the way that they would do in, I don't know, Lithuania or Poland, where you learn a number of different languages. So it leaves a lot of us at a disadvantage. But yes, to think in those terms and to look around the country, and unemployment in North Dakota currently is around 3-4%. Why? Because of the energy breakthrough. So there are parts of the country that are doing well. But yes, relocation might be a necessity. It's very hard to make a plan at this point because we ask people at 17, 18 years of age to make the kind of decision that would really require them to have a pretty sophisticated knowledge of the future. That is my field going to even survive 10 years from now? What are the employment possibilities, and what's the economic prospects for the United States? So they have to ask these questions, and it's not going to be as easy as it was for previous generations, and I see it. I mean, I see it, and my heart goes out to people, and we can train, and they can be very well trained, but if the jobs aren't there, they're not there.
Right, and then therefore they have a harder time getting their first house or loans, or like you mentioned one time, the marriage rate has gone down.
The marriage rate has gone down, and of course we're not reproducing. I was shocked when I saw the birth rate in the United States. We have about 3 million. We had 3 million children were born infants were born in the last year. That's about as low as it's, I mean, we're talking about depression levels of birth rates now. I mean, it's gone down dramatically, and that has repercussions throughout the economy. It's going to be fewer workers down the line, 18, 20, 25 years from now, to pay into these systems. So you have an aging population, but it could be a dramatically aging population. The average age could really creep up if you're not reproducing, if a country doesn't reproduce. So why aren't they reproducing? It follows the same pattern as you saw in the 1930s and the pattern that you saw in the early 1970s when we were going through that horrid recession, 73, that really continued until the Reagan administration came around. The fertility rate, the number of children per female, went below replacement. Now, it increased in the 80s, 90s, etc., but it did go down, and we see that the same pattern taking place now is always a reflection of the economy. And because as the economy goes, people's sense of optimism changes. They can't afford to get married. They can't afford to form households, which of course then affects the new home sales, because a lot of people like to move into a new place, but they're not forming families. So it starts to have, the repercussions start to be felt throughout society, and you kind of have a ricochet effect. This institution goes, then people aren't buying. Then people aren't buying, it has an impact then on the economy, and then the economy impacts household formation, and you can see how you can almost get into a downward cycle pretty quickly, which is what I think we're seeing at this point, which of course affects all of those industries that depend on people getting married and having kids.
Right. Now, my next question, actually it's not a question, and I get this all the time. A lot of people come up to me and say, well, we didn't want this redistribution of wealth. We didn't want all these programs. The liberals did. So therefore, they should pay for them, all of these programs. Now, let's suppose I'm a student in your class and I said that. What kind of a reaction might I get from other students, say?
if they felt that they weren't in favor of it. And well, I think it's interesting. If the question you're asked is, would they be then criticized by other students because they're not going along with the program, I would say no. Actually, what you're seeing from a lot of students is an understanding that they are paying into a system, and it's kind of this fatalistic view they have, that not only are they paying into a system that is becoming increasingly expensive, but it's one that's really not going to be there for them. It's not going to benefit them in the way that they would have expected it to, if and when they ever cashed in and started to draw Social Security, Medicare, etc. So a lot of them feel encumbered by that, and I would hate to think that at some point we get into generational conflict over this, and I'm not sure if and when that's going to happen, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience, because you're going to have one group you can't refuse to pay, but doing it grudgingly, starting to redefine benefits for people. And it's see, this is what happens when you don't have a society that's an economy that's growing. In the 1980s and the 1990s, when you had, in the 1980s, people don't realize we had months where we produced 1 million jobs one month in 83 or 84. It's more than we're producing almost in a year here. Not quite, but we had labor shortages, not because the job market and the economic expansion was so vigorous. We had unemployment under 4% at points. People can't even conceive of this, but I will tell you that during those periods, no one was asking who's rich. No one was asking who has more than I do. And if they did, they were asking it from the point of view, how do I get there? Not how can someone give me contribute part of their wealth to mine. The question is, how did you do it? So you read books by people who were successful, by people like Donald Trump. You read books not to envy the person, but to try to emulate them and try to become as rich or richer than that individual. And that was a mental possibility. It was a possibility within people's, it was more than hypothetical. It was something you could do and you could achieve. And now you don't hear that kind of optimism anymore. So what happens is people then ask, who's getting more than I am and why?
Right.
It's a zero. We've basically introduced the concept of the zero sum as a truism, not an expanding pie, but that the pie is limited, and people have started to believe that that's what the economy really is by its very nature.
Let's go to some of our predictions. We'll do 2 years, right? What do you see in 2 years? High inflation, food rationing? Say violence.
No. Oh no. I don't. No. I can't imagine the unemployment rate going down in the true sense. I mean, yes, if more and more people, one of the perverse aspects of the unemployment rate is that the way that they calculate it is the more people who are discouraged, the lower the unemployment rate goes down, because you shrink the labor pool. The participation rate is going down, which is what the real number is. I think it was around 63% now. It's very few. If that continues, you're either going to have to continue to distribute and redistribute to people to keep them afloat, and we're doing it in many different ways. A lot of people are not. There are millions not paying their mortgages, just for a number of reasons, and the banks are not being very aggressive with them. The foreclosure rates are actually slowing, even though people aren't paying their mortgages. We will have a system in 2 years from now. If these policies continue, we're going to be more in debt, and I can't imagine the unemployment rate going down, or the real unemployment. I can't imagine us having more people with more jobs, and I see that the income levels going down because the economy is not expanding, so the income levels will have to go down. I think it's going to come to the point where people are going to have to organize, which they are already. I mean, you see the Tea Parties and these various movements developing, and they'll first have to take their government back, if they feel that it was taken from them, and then they will have to, they're going to have to look at this and say, look, the only way to get back is not just through higher taxes or cutting spending. We're going to have to embrace an aggressive pro-growth model of economic development. It's the only way out of it. Fortunately, it's America, and we can do it. We have the freedom, we have the ability and the skills to do it. I think there's going to be an awakening. I'm optimistic about it.
But much more than there was with the Tea Party awakening.
I think it'll be broad. I think the Tea Party has to transcend, even go beyond just the discussions about limited government and the like. They have to start thinking about what is you have to present a vision to people about the world, the positive world that you see. What is it? What's your vision of that world? And it's a world where people will live longer, live healthier, be richer, go faster. All the positives that you can think, and you present that kind of a vision, and people will respond to it. And instead of talking about what will be taken away from people in terms of balancing the books, and you provide an optimism to people, but you provide a specific image of a better world. It's not coming from the administration. I hear about transformation, but I don't know what that transformation is supposed to be. I assume the president knows, but he hasn't really been that specific about it. And I think that's the direction we have to go.
Do you think Joe Biden will run for president?
No, I think they're already embracing Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so you think it'll be...
They're already, even Newt Gingrich goes on air and...
social change, and she would be the first woman.
Right, she would be so Marco Rubio would be the first Hispanic,
If he would run for the Republican Party.
Right.
Do you think he'll run in 2016?
I think he's thinking about it. From what I understand, he's been in New Hampshire already, and not to ski.
So he has. So he set up his office, and
it's kind of funny. A lot of people are despondent about the election, and I've been around long enough that I've looked at some worse situations: the Goldwater defeat in '64, the election of Carter in '76, the resignation of Nixon. You can never tell in politics. Nobody would have been able to guess there would have been a Ronald Reagan by 1980, and that he would have put through the changes that basically led to those years and years of prosperity, which Clinton, I believe, inherited and basically followed the same model. And so you don't know what's going to happen. I think politically right now, it's funny, I just saw the movie Lincoln, and I've been doing a lot of research on the party structure. I mean, the Republican Party had just come into being. Most people don't realize that in 1864, Lincoln, the Republican label was so tarnished that Lincoln didn't run as a Republican. He ran as something called the National Union Party. They kind of submerged the Republican concept because they were afraid the public was not going to respond positively. Well, as you know, he was reelected. The Republican Party became a dominant party until Wilson, really, 1912. And so you can never tell. But what they did was they provided a new vision that people eventually responded to. And I think that's what has to take place. I mean, I think it really has to be a vision. Ideas do win elections, and they have to. And if it comes to the point where they have to address different demographic groups, women, blacks, minorities, there is something in the pro-growth message for all of those groups. And you scratch your head and say, why aren't they Republicans or even Tea Party Republicans? And perhaps they will. But it's a question of communicating that. So, as I said, looking back at that time, someone might say, gee, it was terrible when Romney lost, but if he hadn't lost...
Right.
2016 wouldn't have happened, whatever that is, and it becomes an historic moment.
Right.
So.
Okay, we have to end our discussion now, and I'd like to thank Dr. Michael Zay for coming on our program.
And thank you for having me.
And until until next time, and I'd like to thank our viewers for watching us.